Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome to the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I am Dustin Pickering, your anchor and host. Today we have a featured writer from India. His name is Gopal Lahiri. He's a Kolkata-based bilingual poet, critic, editor, writer, and translator. He is the author of 25 books published, including 14 volumes of poems in English, and includes 4 jointly edited anthology of poems, and 8 volumes of poems in prose in Bengali. His poems, translations, and book reviews have been published across various journals, includes Indian literature worldwide. He has recently edited the book titled Jalanawala Bagh Poetic Tributes. He has translated from English to Bengali the short story collections of Israel writers. He has edited a translation work of Tagore songs. His latest poetry collection, titled Alleys Are Filled with Future Alphabets, has received wide acclaim, and a joint collection of poetry titled From Princep Ghat to Pir Panjal Range, published as an ebook. He has attended various poetry festivals in India, including World Poetry Conference held in India and elsewhere abroad. His poems are translated in 14 languages. He is the recipient of the Poet of the Year Award from Destiny Poets UK 2016, SETU Excellence Award 2020, Pittsburgh, US, and Indology Lifetime Achievement Award, West Bengal, India. Thanks for joining us today, Gopal. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine.
That's wonderful. It's good to see you on here, and it's late. I know it's later in India right now than it is here in Houston. It's 10 a.m. So I'm curious. Obviously you're wide-ranging, a lot of literary activity from translation to writing your own stories and poems. What is the art of translation like for you? And what can you say you've learned about national consciousness in language generally from translating other words?
Yeah, first of all, I must say that translation is very important in the sense that because we know not much of language, except maybe 1, 2, or 3. So it's always desirable that you should translate. And of course, I am mostly interested in poetry, but I have translated prose also, especially the Israeli short story. There's a book which has been translated from Hebrew to English by Haya Hoffman, and I have translated from English to Bengali, that is my mother tongue. So it's a two-way thing. So it is, although I don't know the actual original language, I have translated a via media. There is a link language, English. So yes, it is difficult, but whatever gain in translation is a gain. Unless you translate, you don't know, you won't gain anything. So yes, it is difficult sometimes to go, as original as possible, but still you try and do and try to be honest, to be as close to the original as possible if you know the language, and otherwise you have that link language, and especially English, which we know. So that's the way I feel the translation should be done.
Did you work with other people in understanding cultural contexts and things like that, like when you did, for instance, the Israeli volumes? There are certain words and cultural phrases that don't necessarily translate perfectly, and you may have to know a little bit about culture in the country itself. Did you run across that when you were translating?
Yeah. That's very important, that cultural context. You have to know the culture to translate it in a proper way. And right. For this particular book, yes, I have a really tough time. So only thing I have that I have to consult, because it's maybe around 10, 15 years back. So at that point of time, not much of the internet and like that. So I have to rely more on a library and more of few people who know Hebrew. So that way I could discuss with them and do justice to the original
Right.
language.
Right. So it's good to have experts and people who know know a little bit more
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
the culture and the contexts of things. When did you first take interest in English? I mean, what was that like, and what was your learning process like of getting acquainted with another language? I'm curious about that.
Basically, when I started in my school, I used to learn two languages. Bengali is our mother tongue, and English is the other language. And there are, especially I am from Calcutta or Kolkata, I can call it. So it's dominated by the Bengali people. So our language is Bengali. But the second language is always English because British were there, and after the independence, still English is much more popular there. And so in that way, we always prefer that after our mother language, the next language is English because India is a multilingual country, and we have more than 20 or 25 odd languages. But the leading language is mainly English and Hindi. So I would prefer because I'm comfortable with English since my childhood days. So I try to learn the English much more than any other language besides your mother tongue. So in that way, I started have that affinity to write in English. And although in my first phase of life, in my college, and after that, I used to write mostly in Bengali with occasional writing in English. But as because I am basically a man from science, art scientist. So when my profession is also on geologist. So I used to travel a lot of places within India and sometimes abroad also. So once I was working in a company which has been my job is to move around. So when I went out of Calcutta, so I have to. But my passion is there always to in literature. So whatever time I used to manage, besides my work assignment, I used to write a lot. And English was the preferable language because Bengali outside Bengali, nobody understands that way, except in your known circle. So that's why I have to depend a lot many on English. So in that way, my closeness to English comes, and I started writing mostly in English, and now it is I'm writing Prose. English is almost the first language you can.
So, and speaking of your work in geology and being an artist and poet and all this, I wondered, how does nature relate into your poetry, and how does it serve as a vehicle for broader conceptual meaning?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, studying geology, that is basically art science. I mean, you're close to the nature. We have to move around, and you are to study the exposure, the rocks and minerals. And there are so many features in the arts we were studying. So that point of time, and plus the people, when you move around into the remote areas, you meet the people to study and come to their culture and language. So it gives a lot of avenues to fall, and also it gives a lot of resources to write whatever way you feel, whether it's poetry or prose. So because my main interest is in poetry, so I used to get a lot of resource from the nature. My preference is nature. And if you ask me who is your favorite poet, I'll say God, because God has created the nature. So, and I think Robert Browning has told that God is a perfect. So in that way, nature is my. You can call it that studying science, and then these. Normally, people say that science is not very just the opposite of literature or in art or whatever way, and there is a conflict. But in my case, this science, art science, is not as rigid as physics or chemistry, or doesn't go by the formulas. It has a lot of concepts and your modeling theories. So there you have a lot of flexibility, which actually help to and enlarge your visions. You can think a lot. You can have your own thinking, your own model. So in that way, it helps actually. That studying theology, that science has helped me to in my literary progress.
Interesting. And you mentioned God as the sort of the author of nature. I'm curious, does any particular faith practice influence your writing or encourage your work ethic?
Not really as such, but because it's not that always I write or get the material from the resources from the nature, because I love people as well. I also, the poetry is always, it's not the only the abstract art, or some people say poetry means building castle in the air. It's not like that. There is a society, and there is a lot of feelings, consciousness, and you are always surrounded by the people. So in that way, you can say that you have to strike a balance between your arts, your thinking, with what is happening. I mean, in this social context. So that balance is very important, which I try to follow and try to. I mean, you can say that emulate the thing. Even though basically that Octavio Paz, you must be knowing that Latin American poets, he is once told that poetry is basically synthesis. I mean, prose is more of an analysis and poetry is more of a synthesis. So in that way, you synthesize the matter, whatever it's in your mind, and you try to express that thing. You synthesize. In that way, everything will come. I mean, it's a nature, it's a people, and the surroundings, all those things, it comes, and you try to imbibe those things, and then you express yourself. And that could be in prose or in poetry, whatever way.
That's a really interesting distinction, because there's a lot of questions about what is difference between prose and poetry, and as you stated, synthesis versus analysis, I guess. And I think that makes sense, because when you're writing prose, most of the time, if you're writing a story, it has to be pretty linear. You have a plot, you have a structure that's very cohesive. And then in poetry, you can jump around and you can build on all these separate, contexts and combine them. That's actually, I think that's a very apt way of looking at it. So, would you like to maybe share a poem or two with us?
Yeah. You are also, I've heard that you have you like there's something mystic, spiritual thing. So
I think so, definitely.
This poem of mine is, I can't really in that way spiritual, but there is a feeling that it's beyond something which we are seeing, the normal thing. It's not as such supernatural, but you can say it's transcendental. So the title of my poem is Transcend.
Okay.
That, those are the days when the moon is round and golden. I count my quick steps on way to the rooftop to witness moonrise and welcome the unknowing. The veil has been pulled back. The bird songs resonate inside. Fragrant flowers bloom and cultivate stillness. I find rest in the arms of the formless. Under the sky, I sit in silence on the uneven floor and turn inward to have a glimpse of the divine, to regain myself, to align in this cosmic order. I must look outside me to discover what I think of the grander outlines we are part of. One side of me softens, and other breaks into tiny pieces. The life's losses are now distant past, pain and wood awash in the rain. I have disappeared as if into something eternal, sacred, and beautiful. My gaze softens, and the ages of my identity dissolve in the holy mystery you once called God. Radiate from within My breathing reveals to me as a miracle. Thank you.
Wonderful. I love. It's a really difficult concept to wrap your head around sometimes. I think poetry is the only way to really express those kinds of deeper truths.
Yes.
You know, and as we evolve, humanity kind of evolves in our understanding of things, and through, you know, I guess you could say it's part of our civilization and development, and we start seeing things differently as we develop. And you know, when you say what you once called God, the holy mystery you once called God. I mean, we still face a lot of mystery in life, and there's just so much grandeur and awe. You know, I think Bertrand Russell made you know, the awe was the center of what he called the free man's worship. So I think, you know, you can still hold transcendent values and not necessarily be a rigid, dogmatic religious person. That's definitely true. And I think poetry is, you know, as you said, it's a very mystical experience. It's very big. It's amazing what it can do. So I'm curious, you know, what are some of what before COVID, obviously, because there's, you know, most everything's online now. Were there ever any real intimate poetry circles you participated in, like, you know, poetry readings and that were in person that you got to know a lot of interesting people?
Yeah. Poetry reading is, I was always interested to be in certain groups or circles, not of course very particular to particular circle and not move out others. I always feel that I should move around and to meet people and to go to different groups, different circles, and try to mix and mingle with the people. And it gives, although you must be knowing that Philip Larkins once, he didn't like this performance poetry or this so much poetry reading. He says that these are very easy takes, easy syntax, easy emotion. Poetry is something which is very, very serious, and you have to read on your own, and it will linger in you for some time. So you have to give certain time to it. It's not that just you go and perform poetry, right, or you read a poetry and try to. Normally, you must have noticed that especially in particularly in poetry conference or poetry reading, we used to try to read those poems which has a lot of good phonetics and quick and very easy to understand, so that audience can easily catch those things, and they are in. You can connect with them much better with the audience. So in a way, yes, I love to be there also to connect with the people. That is important. That you always want to have your own readers, your own audience who will listen to you, who will read your poem. That is there. So with the passage of time, I think this performance poetry or poetry reading or in a network or the conference, or there's so many things that are happening online poetry. So these will be there and will flourish day by day. So we have to be the part of this process. And I am no exception, and I like it. And I, of course, you can always, poetry is there to write in your own leisure time. You
right.
can publish in your own way. But to connect with the people is also important.
Right.
I always love to be there. Love to be there. Different groups and they're online.
I think it's interesting how you say, you know, you move from different social groups to one social group to the next. I was the same way when I was involved in poetry circles. I like to learn about different kinds of people, and I don't know, people are so cliquish sometimes. They like get to their group and they like exclude so much else, you know. And I don't know, it's like, I guess it's a poetry thing. I don't know if it's a poet's thing or not, to just sort of bounce around and get to know different kinds of people and, you know, absorb the world so much rather than exclude and try to be in a secure place, you know. And you know, there's a poem that I think describes this very well by Robert Frost called "The Mending Wall," which I frequently refer to, how people put these little defenses between themselves and their neighbors. You know, these little walls. It's a metaphor for, you know, putting a barrier between you and your and another person. And they do it psychologically. They do it socially. And poets are there to build bridges and learn about people, and really strange calling, I guess you could say. So, who are some of your favorite contemporary poets? I mean, maybe you have some local poets or friends that you admire, or are there any other writers out there that are writing today that you find interesting?
Yeah, yeah. Especially in India, I like read my contemporary poets, and
Mhm.
you also, as because you are quite connected with Indian poetry and Indian poets, you must be knowing. I have one or two poets which I love to read. One is Mr. Poet Sanjeev Sethi. You may have heard his name, Sanjeev Sethi. He writes in a very different way, and his word play and words, using of words, unknown words in
Right.
poetry, which is very uncommon nowadays, because now people are writing very easy text and easy words. So I love to read Sanjeev Sethi, and
Mm.
then of course there are a few others like one Saima Green. I don't know whether you have heard her name. She's very good. And then Sudeep Sen and
Mhm.
Sonit Mandal and Sunil Sharma. And, of course, then Jagari Mukherjee and
Oh,
Amit
yes.
Saha. So lot of these are younger guys are also coming up. So I love to read all my contemporaries here in India. Yes, yes. And outside India, whatever journals or different what you call that online avenues are there. So I love to write in few journals which you must have heard. One is In Sweat and Tears.
Mhm.
Then one is one. There is one from one short class journal. And there are a few others, cartoon, race, and one recently I have written one platform. They are publishing from Dublin, Ireland. It's called that particular journal is called Madrigal. So they are very youngsters, people who are I think from Trinity College. The two editors, boys and girls, they are very young. So I love to be there, and we have written, and recently they have launched their journal, and they are publishing in print also and also online. So those I love to be in touch with them, whether he's young, in our age, or maybe slightly older people. So I crisscross this whole different type of generations and try to understand how they write, how they feel. So it's always a challenge to you also as a poet and as a writer, saying that you must know your
Right.
contemporaries, and you try to see how where you are placed. So that is also important. And of course, if you talk about the earlier poets and writers, like Shakespeare is there,
Mm-hmm.
Byron. Byron is very my
Right.
favorite one of the poets, Byron. So still I read his poems. And
Oh, yeah.
T.S. Eliot and Larkins is also one of my favorite poets. So in that way, I read quite a lot.
I was just reading a blog from a student in Ireland last night, actually, and he talks a lot about many contemporary Irish modernists who are not being, really recognized in the earth, in the spirit of the world poetry scene. And I think it's interesting that you brought up Ireland, in Irish poetry circles and stuff, and it's it seems like there's just a lot of being that's not being recognized, and I don't know if it's kind of being sidelined. I don't know if it's like a new aesthetic that's going around or what's going on. There's so much being missed. It's just beautiful and interesting, and it's not being recognized. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I wanted to say another thing, about the journals and stuff online that if you're a writer, it's nice that when people make comments on your work. On a lot of these journals open up for comments on people's poems and stuff. It's really nice when people leave comments and say they like it, why they don't like it, whatever. And so if viewers out there like to read a lot of these journals, it's really nice when authors love, when you comment on their work and say things about them that are, about their work and their writing, and especially if it's very, solid criticism of what's being written. So I would definitely encourage people to, make comments on people's work and be constructive and try to be positive and say nice things as well as maybe a few words that they can improve on. So, what piqued your interest in?
By the way, besides my writing poetry, I'm also a critic as such. So I used to do a lot of book reviews, and I'm in panel of various journals and newspapers and like that. So I love critiquing as well. So that gives you a very, can say a very sharp view of what's going on. And you set your mind that how you read a book and how you analyze that. So that analytical mind, which comes, of course, from my scientific background, that we always do whatever you analyze first. So in that way, my interest in criticism is there.
Absolutely. So who have you written on any particular poets, or do you kind of like just pick, you get books that people send you, or, any particular writers that you've critiqued that you've observed interesting aspects to their work?
My work, of course, if you are in Bengal, in Calcutta, always Tagore is there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Reading from our school and colleges. So that influence is always there in your mind. But with the passage of time to move on and try to read the different other poets, and you feel that you are in a different zone as such. But honestly, I love reading to those poets who has more of an image based. If you read my poems, I have a lot of emphasis on images, building images, because that is my interest. That more of an image poetry, which like a painting, you can see that this is one aspect, because it's up to you to feel how, in which way you will write. Some people prefer more of a surreal type. Some people prefer very narrative poem, which is very popular nowadays. And now people are writing more of a narrative poem. It's almost as good as a prose and poetry. You can hardly find any difference as such. But mine is slightly away from that, even though I write sometimes narrative poems as such. But I used to have that that image-based poem, which normally I love to. That's why I talked about Byron, those old school poets were there.
Right.
And in that way, I love to be there. And also, I prefer those poets who has a lot of vocabularies, a lot of good words they are bringing into the poetry and create some new words. I've heard Shakespeare has created some 150 new words. So like that, I love reading those poets who can give you something new. Something very inventive.
Right. Something that makes you think too. Something that kind of challenges.
Pleasure.
Right. Yeah, and of course the pleasure aspect, is you feel you can feel the words, and you can also contemplate them at the same time, and maybe perceive things differently, or it goes back to that synthesis where you see a picture that's more, so much vaster than you're aware of. You see all these elements that are going on in the poem that are very disparate elements being put together and synthesized into this unit of poetic thoughts. It's the poem is a thought. It's profound in its own right. And I noticed one thing I noticed about your poetry when I read it is there's a little bit of a, like you said, the image. There's a little bit of a kind of, it feels like it's reading like a painting in a way, mixed with the like philosophy and a sort of structural dynamic that like geology. Like studying rocks and stuff. There's kind of like picking, going through a mountain and digging under and seeing the structure of various sediments. And it's very, I really like it because I like it. I like the way it flows, and it's very structured. But it's also got the broader feelings and the thought into it that you know, a lot of poetry is lacking in out there right now. Is there's just so much. There's an explosion of rabble poetry.
You're correct. A lot of, I mean, noise. A lot of
Yeah.
noise is there. So that's, and some people feel that poetry is almost like a slogan. So in that way, their thinking is like that. If you write in that particular way, you can have an impact to the readers, to the larger scale of the society. So that's one way of writing, whether it is prose or poetry. But there are other ways, of course, which you mentioned, that you take some disparate elements and then you synthesize, then you write something. And poetry is basically what I feel that it's for the evolved mind. I mean, it's not like just like you say something and it becomes poetry. So in that way, you have to have a lot of your evocation or recall. You have to be, it has to be there, I think, somewhere. That there should be something that you should analyze within yourself, and then you come out and write certain things. So in that way,
I think so. It's definitely, and I think poetry, it's a power. It's not, it's, you know, I don't think anybody can write poetry. I think they can practice writing poetry. But there's a lot of talk about, you know, you can teach a poetry and you can show people how to write it, but it may not connect or it may not fix it, like, unless you're sort of a natural born poet. I mean, you can teach people style and you know, how to develop a voice. But I noticed, at least in America, in the United States here, the MFA programs and stuff, they sort of have this, I would jokingly call the MFA voice, which is very much a style. It's orientation in the poems, and to me, it feels stale. It just feels stale, and I'm sure it has a value, you know. But it's like all poems I see published in major journals now have the MFA voice, and it's rather boring to me. And you know, I like fresh. You know, there's just not many fresh. And the independent presses, it's their job to bring out the experimental and the, you know, stuff that's not being recognized so much by the big five or the huge publishers out there, you know. And I think that's why I'm involved in the independent small presses and myself. I mean, that's what I like to do. So that's just my take, you know. Of course, my word is as good as, I don't know, as I say Stone Mountain is out here.
I know.
It's just
I know
what
you
it
are
is.
doing a lot of things. You do some competition. You are asking younger guys and do your press there and you're publishing. I mean, that's a very good thing. Instead of just go to the confined to the academic mentoring and other things, which is very routine. And of course, I do believe that a bit of teaching or mentoring or learning is important to start with.
Absolutely.
To start with, but after that you have to evolve yourself. You have to thinking something in your own way. It's not that if somebody puts you certain in your mind and you will follow that. But yes, initial stages, yes, a little bit of learning is definitely required. I mean, the system, and because you must have seen social media, the explosion of social media, and any Tom, Dick, and Harry started writing, and it becomes a night of floods, and everybody is writing poetry, especially in India or in many other places. Almost everybody is writing poetry. So
I definitely see a huge, you know, literary mentality in it coming from India. Like, there's so many publishers and so much publishing and so many seeking out all the world's various voices out there. I don't see it nearly as much in other places as widely as I've seen it in India. Like, I've had friends have told me, like, I've had Indian publishers contact me and blah blah blah. You know, it's like there's a lot of literary activity in India right now. I don't know why or where it's coming from, but that seems to be where the voices are being heard or being, at least being promoted to an extent. Where, so as you know, stuff out in the United States, it's the dry social justice academic voices, and those are the guys that are getting published. And it's hard to get, you're breaking in, it's hard, but I see a lot of avant-garde and fresh voices being promoted in India and in other parts of the country, in other smaller underground circles. And it's tough to be any kind of artist, and it's not easy when you got the gatekeepers saying, okay, well, you have to spend 10 years and then with this institution and Cornell or Harvard or Yale or something to be able to get into the New Yorker, and then you can get a book deal, and it's forget it. I'm not gonna waste it.
It's good in India in the sense that because there's a lot of people are writing and there's a good competition, and you feel encouraged to write more and more. So that's a very good sign.
Yes.
And not only in particular in all the states, India is a big country. Of course, not to US, but within itself, it's quite a big, and there are different cultures, languages are there. And so naturally, everybody is very much interested to contribute to certain things. And yes, you are correct that especially in the last 10, 15 years or 20 years, there is a huge explosion of young, old, and everybody.
The hodgepodge, everybody's invited, They're bringing out some great stuff, though. It's really producing a lot of wonderful words.
Yeah, a lot of good poets. Yes, there are a lot of good poets and writers, and it's excellent, especially not only in English language, because we have many other languages. So literature is very, very rich in all the regional languages. So that is also another aspect.
So if you have any, we have about a little less than a minute left. If you have any words to impart to future generations or some thank yous to give out to, mentors you've had.
Yeah, my I should say not advice, but suggestion to the future generation is that open your eyes. That is the main thing. You open your eyes and you try to see in your own way. I mean, you should analyze yourself, not by someone else. And I'm sure that success will come. And we know that poetry, if you talk about poetry always begins with delight and ends with wisdom. So that thing we should remember, that you should open your mind.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us today, Gopal. We'll go ahead and close out. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. We had Gopal Lahiri today, and I'm Dustin Pickering. If you'd like to donate, find us at paypal.me/nyparrot. And please subscribe if you have not subscribed. And if you have, please tell others about us. Spread the word, share our videos, share our content. Tell us what you think. Put a like up there on the YouTube. So thank you very much again, Gopal, and just keep promoting the show. Everyone out there, just keep talking about us. You can reach us out to the Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com to request an interview. We want to give it the best and only global platform